I don't know, Ava, anything about your career. I don't know if you have one.
A commentator could use the words radical and grooming.
LGBT grooming agenda in school.
I think the issue here is age.
Nearly half of all lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender pupils in our schools have been bullied.
Being a woman should be merely the first step in a wider mission to bring down capitalism. Now, I don't think most women are on board with that, and most women would be rather surprised to be utilized in this fashion. But that is very clearly and explicitly, and I quote the various scholars and writers who've been pushing this for years, this is explicitly the aim. It's a basis for madness. When people say the gay community, who are you talking about? It's like women think this. Oh, really? 50% of the species all agree on something. Blacks say this. Really? Now, this is, let me put it another way. If somebody said, I don't know, I just love the working class. Who?
Yeah.
I just love the middle class. Who? I love the upper class. Who are you talking about? And it's the same with this. Why would we be falling for this interpretation of society as depending solely or primarily on interest groups based on gender/sex, sexual orientation, race, and a bit more? Why would we be doing that? Why would we be taking the individualism out of individuals and lumping them in these demonstrably incoherent bodies that don't even exist? They don't even exist. The LGBT community. Take me to your leader. Come on.
Douglas can make fun of everything. In the next clip, we're gonna have the LGBTQ leader arguing with Pierce and feminine moral women about why children don't need Pride's parade.
She will claim a pride parade held at the school promoted gay lifestyles and indoctrinated children.
Listen, we do not need to be teaching this radical LGBT grooming agenda in schools. It's one thing if parents want to do that on their own time. That is a parent's right to do that, with some exceptions, of course. But to bring this in and bake this into a public school curriculum is wrong. And meanwhile, Chinese students are learning quantum physics, and we've got our students learning how to twerk from drag queens. It's not going to end well. This is grooming. This is ideological mind control. It's introducing this to a group of individuals, especially to young kids who have no business learning any of this sexually explicit material. This is not about being anti-gay, or as the incorrectly labeled Ron DeSantis' bill, don't say gay. This is about keeping this out of the classroom because it does not belong there. This is a grooming agenda. It is extreme. It is explicit. It does not belong in front of young children at their school. They should be learning reading, writing, and arithmetic, not this filth.
Half of all lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender pupils in our schools have been bullied. Bullied, teased, sometimes subjected to physical violence.
Learning tolerance and how to live in a society might be better than a book of explicit content.
Simply because of their sexuality or their gender identity. So this education in British schools is designed to combat bullying and to promote understanding and acceptance. None of the teaching in British schools is sexually explicit, nor is any of the material in United States schools.
Yes, it is.
It is all about promoting understanding and tolerance. So what's just been said is a complete misrepresentation of the teaching, and I think that any parent would want their child to be brought up in a school where understanding and acceptance of difference is valued, where people are not bullied because of their sexuality.
Okay, here's what I would say to that,
identity.
Peter. I don't disagree with some of what you just said. I think the issue here is age. I've got 4 kids. You've all gone through, obviously, all this. I just think the idea that at 4, any child should be exposed to anything like this is ridiculous.
I'm really concerned that a commentator could use the words radical and grooming when we're having a very sensible conversation about helping children to understand who they are.
If you tell a 4-year-old they're a dog, they'll believe it. At that age, it's impossible to explain complex concepts like identity. They're too young to understand. You're just imposing your ideology on them.
Well, as we saw that poll, 78% of Americans would share a lot of the views that Tommy Laren expressed there. They do not want to see kids aged 4 getting bombarded with this kind of ideology at school.
But what kind of ideology? What exactly are we talking about? And if you listen to Peter, he
Well,
explains it very carefully.
I'll give an example. When you start teaching kids, I mean, the BBC, for example, had one of their teaching videos said there were over 100 genders. The BBC should not be teaching children there are 100 genders. One of them was astrogender, which is an affinity with the stars, right? The ones flying around the moon. I'm sorry. I do actually think that children should not be exposed to that kind of claptrap.
I don't dictate the curriculum,
can we let
but I doubt
children
that
be
that's
children?
on there.
Particularly at that age.
Come on, Richard, they're growing up in households
there's an
which are
age,
different.
there's an appropriate...
Their families have the conversations they feel they should have.
Who are desperately concerned about what is being taught in primary school. And the truth is, we don't know what's being taught.
You have just heard about the high percentage of children who suffer bullying, who are vulnerable, where safeguarding is very relevant to their teaching and their education.
Empathy. That's got nothing to do with gender ideology. You don't need to teach...
a pride...
Aside from all of this, we actually teach sex quite explicitly in heterosexual relationships from a really young age. You actually have children in nativity plays where you're playing a mother who has an immaculate conception and then gives birth to a baby. What are you teaching about? You're talking about...
If you've ever, as I have done 4 times, had kids who've appeared in these things they thought, they haven't got a Scooby-Doo what any of that means.
Well, I grew up Catholic and I knew what sex was from a very young age.
Well, I'm sure you did.
But what's the purpose of that story? The purpose of that story is love.
Yes.
The purpose of that story is bringing people together. And that is what the 4-year-old is being taught.
Kids gonna find either way at the right age, but you indoctrinating kids with your ideology, it's just criminal.
I want to bring you say why do you say she?
For context, a man was imprisoned, and before his imprisonment, he transitioned to a woman. So he went to a women's prison, not a man's prison, as he should.
Immediately to me sounds incredibly confusing. You're saying she, so you presumably think that she is a woman, and yet she is being moved to a male prison because nobody else actually now thinks she is actually a woman. Schools should not be tolerated.
This is the most interesting interview from the video, so stay tuned.
But the schools are not.
A teacher should not be saying, if you believe that women have vaginas and men have penises, you have to leave the school. That is complete nonsense.
No.
Right?
In this particular case, the Telegraph cited this handful of examples. They were by teachers, individual teachers. They were not school policy. And in at least one case, the school disowned the teacher and the policy and said that it wouldn't happen again.
But what about this case in Rye College?
Well, yeah, I'm sure there are some examples of excesses. But on the basis of those exceptions, you can't make a generalised attack upon the school system and suggest that all our kids are being propagandised in this way, because it's simply not
But when you hear
happening.
that teacher, I think, to bring Douglas back in, when you hear that teacher, there's clear evidence of what we've all been fearing has been going on, which is a teacher caught on tape literally spewing nonsensical gender ideology propaganda.
But one teacher.
Yes,
only
one teacher.
One teacher. Tens of thousands.
Well, hang on. One teacher caught on tape. Right, there've been many other instances of this being reported, but no one's actually had it on tape. It's a bit like, I would liken it to the Partygate scandal, when we finally got a video of the people having what was clearly a party. There've been lots of rumours about it. So now we have a teacher clearly on tape doing this
But
stuff.
it's not official school policy.
If I may,
Schools across the country are
Well,
not,
she's still, to my knowledge, she is still working at that school. Douglas.
If I may, first of all, Ava rather unfortunately misspoke earlier when she said that the schoolgirl in question was acting out of fallacy. I think you meant a fantasy. But actually she is acting out of fallacy.
Thanks ever so
fallacy.
much. But do you know what I find fascinating?
You're right with fallacy.
Do you know what's fascinating about
which
Douglas?
has been propagated. A fallacy which has been propagated by gender ideologues and is doing profound damage to gay people, among others, in our society, as well as women.
Like
and let me
you've
explain
ever
very
cared.
quick. Let me explain very quickly why. I can't quite hear you. I can hear you muttering something. Let me quickly explain why. A poll that just got published in the United States showed that among the general population, support for gay marriage has been starting to decline in the last year. Why is that? It's because the arguments that actually brought about liberal rights for all minorities in the last few decades have started to get turned on their head and turned against people. What is the source of that? It is the gender ideology movement. What is the tripwire for the general public? It is children. It is people learning that their children are being taught nonsensical things. It is being seen by the wider public, most of whom are heterosexual and don't need to identify as cis or anything else. It is being seen from that vantage point as the LGBTQIA plus movement losing control of itself. And so a backlash is starting. And the backlash is coming because people are lying to children and are using children for medical experiments. There's nothing funny about that. There's nothing that should cause levity in that. It should be treated by adults seriously.
Okay.
Most people who supported the LGBTQ people in the 80s, 90s have nothing to do with today's supporters. Today, supporters are just full of hate.
Ava?
So, Douglas, it's really important, actually, all of that point that you've just brought up, it's very on brand for you because, you know, you like to stoke fear. You've actually made a career out of it. I'll take you back to your book, The Strange Death of Europe, and you made a big fright, you frightened the entire public about your thoughts on Europe, and we ended up in Brexit. You weren't the sole contributor to that, but you were a big voice.
Can we stick on to the
Ava,
I will. And then, now we're talking about LGBTQ,
if I may say so
and you're
very
creating...
quickly,
Hang on, you spoke. I'm speaking.
No,
I'm speaking.
I'll
you spoke.
reply.
This is,
I'll reply.
Hello. I haven't
let
finished.
Ava speak, please.
Now, back on the trans issue, when you're talking about LGBTQ, what you've just done there is basically say that the whole of America, who have historically had a problem with gay marriage, are now turning on it because a couple of children in a classroom in Sussex want to be a cat. If you can't see the ridiculousness in that argument, I can't help you.
The bigger issue is there is no such thing as gender ideology. We all have gender identities. You identify as a man, and I fully respect you.
Well, no, hang on. I don't identify as a man. I was born a biological male.
Yes.
That's where this whole thing
Piers, you need to let me
goes rogue. I'll bring you back in, Douglas, in one second. That's where the whole debate goes rogue. You were born a biological male. You were born a biological female. Douglas, biological male. This is just a fact. Right?
No.
Once you start saying there are hundreds of genders and you can identify as anything you want, you're going to end up with kids at school going, I'm a horse. And you've got to treat me like a horse.
Piers, you're confusing two things.
No, I'm not.
Sex and gender.
I'm not.
I accept.
They are being conflated.
Biological sex is one thing which I totally accept, and so do 99% of the people in the LGBT plus community. Gender is something different. Gender identity is how you see yourself.
And do you believe it's limitless?
No, I don't believe it's limitless.
What's the limit?
Well, there is basically male and female and intersex, but there are people who have different gender identities.
No, but how many genders are there?
Well, there is no fixed number.
So what's the limit?
I don't see a particular limit.
There's no limit. So when you said there's no, you said there is a limit. Now you admit there's no limit.
Sorry.
Well,
there is male and female.
Is there a limit or not to the number of genders?
Identity.
No, that's sex. But on gender, is there a limit to number of genders?
Well, there are some people who are asexual. That's an identity.
No, there are some the BBC has put in education videos. There are 100 plus genders.
Well, I don't agree with that.
So what is the limit? What's the number?
Well,
if you can't say a number, it's either because you don't know the number or you don't want to hurt anybody. In either case, you're delusional.
I'm not going to specify a particular number, but it's very small.
But where do you draw the line?
Well, I draw the line based on science and evidence. And we know that there is a thing called intersex, where people are born with a mixture of both
that is
male,
literally what it says on. That's what it says on the tin.
Female.
That is intersex.
Yeah.
People are born with chromosomes from both, right? That is a medical condition.
Yeah.
That's inarguable, right? We're talking about gender.
Well, trans identity is also a biological fact.
I know, but once
rooted in brain structures and processes.
I understand it, but once
as the new science shows.
But once you get into 100 genders, people can
we're not debating 100 genders.
Well, actually, the BBC has taught kids that. This is back to Douglas's point about affecting the brains of impressionable young kids.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the BBC if they're saying 100 plus genders.
Okay, Douglas.
Very quickly, I don't know, Ava, anything about your career. I don't know if you have one. but you did try to imply that you knew something about mine, and you just showed you know nothing about it, because actually my 2017 bestseller, The Strange Death of Europe, was not about the EU. So you should learn at some point to read more than the title of the book before commenting upon it.
It was about migration.
Let me very quickly...
And how rude are you? How rude are you?
Very quickly... Very
You've
quickly,
built a career out of fear-mongering, and you're now importing those evangelical American ideas onto UK television.
You haven't even built a career, have you? You haven't even built a career.
What are you talking about? I'm on the same panel as you, Hun, and we're getting the same...
Do you know what?
And it's why, as I say, you can always predict exactly who is going to latch onto the latest claim. When, for instance, the big bearded man with male genitalia wins the women's weightlifting competition, you can predict with 100% accuracy who is going to say, yeah, what's the problem with that? And the people who are going to say, I'm not sure Clive the big weightlifter should be winning the women's category. You can predict it. And the people who say, why have you got a problem with that, bigot, are always the same people who believed in the past.
This is how a rational mind would think. It's not racist or sexism. I would call this pattern recognition.
That our societies needed to be pulled apart in another fashion. And now they'd like to do it in this fashion. And simultaneously demands that we pretend not to know about things that we all knew till yesterday.